delighted to have Hervé DELPHIN with us, unfortunately in virtual. I feel a bit alone. I would have preferred you to be next to me, but too bad. I know that your schedule is really full, so thank you for saving some time for us today. So we will talk about Europe's Indo-Pacific strategy and its future. Shh. And Hervé DELPHIN is the right person to do that, because he's head of the strategic planning at the External Action Service of the European Union. So what I suggest is starting with a set of questions that I prepared for him. And then we'll move to our speakers of the day, or at least those who are still in the room with us, and I would like to give them the chance to ask their own question also to Mr. DELPHIN, and then I will open the floor to the general public here in Ifri and online. So as you know, in recent years, the Indo-Pacific narrative has gained momentum in Europe. First, member states such as France, Germany, and then the Netherlands adopted their own strategy, and they pushed, they encouraged Brussels to adopt also its own approach. And EU strategic approach was adopted back in September 2021. And it might not have had the coverage that it deserved it at that time, because it was announced the same day as the new defense partnership between the US, UK, and Australia, AUKUS. So that's what was maybe difficult birth, so to say. And in February this year, the French presidency of the Council and the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Joseph Borrell, co-organized in Paris a ministerial forum for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, bringing together the European institutions, the foreign ministers of the 27 EU member states, as well as 30 partners from the Indo-Pacific region. But as you know, neither the US nor the China were invited. I think it was an important summit, an important way to demonstrate the EU's commitment to the region, and also the EU's willingness to go its own way in the Indo-Pacific. But as you know also, 2 days after the summit, the war in Ukraine started. And since then, the attention is very much focused on the situation in Europe, which is very, very grave. So my first question to you, Mr. DELPHIN, it's pretty straightforward. What is happening with the EU Indo-Pacific strategy now that war is back on the European continent? We know that it might not be very easy to build up a consensus at the European level to adopt a single approach to the region. What about now when there is this grave conflict going on the European continent?
And maybe going back to what Thomas Gomard said, that it's about the title is not after the war, because we are still in the war, and the war started a long time ago. And I would like to say a bit the same when it comes to the EU engagement in the Indo-Pacific, because it's before the war, it's during the war, and hopefully it will be after the war, because we hope that there will be an after war. You rightly pointed out where we were a year ago. Still, I think the sort of the bit of political earthquake of the AUKUS that was felt in Paris, probably more than in Brussels, but there was still some aftershocks here in Brussels. But I'd like to maybe just to get back a bit of point back in history. The first time we discussed actually with the policy planners in the member states on the Indo-Pacific strategy was 2018. So it's something that doesn't come from, because we were pushed, as you say, by member states. certainly we were encouraged by member states, but the sort of the strategic thinking and about engaging in the Indo-Pacific comes from a long way. And it's not because there is the war in Ukraine now, the war of aggression by Russia, that they should distract from our strategic engagement. And if we look at what happened since last year, was quite a lot, actually. There has been, of course, the two presidents, Biden and Macron, trying to sort of settle the aftermath of the AUKUS. There was this European Council formal endorsement of the strategy back in October, and the ministerial forum in Paris, you mentioned. There was a high-level dialogue organized by the Czech presidency as well. And you can take any of the 7 chapters of the strategy and things are moving on. So what I'd like to point out here is that maybe optically or maybe in the media that doesn't show up enough that EU is still working and still very much engaged on the Indo-Pacific. But we agreed on the expansion of the coordinated maritime presence in the Northwest Indian Ocean. We developed a bilateral dialogue with the US on the Indo-Pacific. We finalized negotiation with Thailand and EU-Malaysia partnership and cooperation agreement. We relaunched the FTA negotiations with India. I mean, name it. Comprehensive air transport agreement with ASEAN countries. I mean, the list is long. So it's not because there is the war that we do not deliver. And I'd like also maybe answer some of other diplomats of other countries who said, well, but the EU seems to be like completely consumed by the one single issue of the conflict, the war of aggression by Russia. And of course, it consumes a lot of energy, of political energy, and also financial resources, but it's not necessarily at the expense of the other engagements. And certainly for Indo-Pacific, it is the case. Indo-Pacific also is key for the EU as a geopolitical actor. And I maybe during the course of the conversation with the other panelists on the floor, we can discuss about the sort of interconnectedness between the two strategic theater of Europe and the Indo-Pacific. But I would say what we also sort of, some would say it was a reality check, is the impact of the conflict on the rest of the world. The sort of the triple shock of energy, of food, of rising inflation, which has sort of been an accelerator of, let's say, issues that were already there for some or have been, I would say, exacerbated, is something to really reflect seriously upon. And I know that many to the global south, this is a term I would reject. I don't think it's a bit condescending, but I think it's the other parts of the world which feel the impact. And what we've seen in other parts, not just in Indo-Pacific, is that countries do not want to be caught between a rock and a hard place. So it's not by let's say, pushing the countries to take a stake in the war, either you're with us or you're against us. I think they have to, whether they are supporting the UN Charter principles, and I think this is what it is about, in the interest of every member state of the UN. I think there were strong statements made during that week in UNGA, and I would like to refer to the title of today's workshop about reimagining multilateralism, which is also very important. So is this the sort of a loop way of saying that, yes, Indo-Pacific is still a strategy, that we've continued to maintain the momentum for it. And if anything, I would say that this continued engagement, I would say we should even double down after the conflict or because of the conflict. And maybe also this conflict has shown to certain part of the world, including in the Indo-Pacific, that the EU is not just an economic actor. We are truly a geopolitical actor. The way we have responded to the conflict is also something that is not only tailored to respond to the conflict in Ukraine, it can be also used to mobilize to respond to conflict and crisis in other parts of the world. And I think for those partners who were doubting about the security credentials of the EU and its member states, it's also, I would say, an important element that comes from this conflict.
Okay, thanks a lot for this. You said that the EU must maybe double down on its effort in the Indo-Pacific. What would see as the main priorities, or what would you see as the main, the next step into the implementation of European strategy in the region?
I mean, there are certainly initiatives that are already frameworks that are supporting the Indo-Pacific strategy. I would say first the post-Cotonou agreement, so which is particularly relevant for the Pacific countries, just still to be ratified. But we've seen, and we may come back again for the Pacific islands, and after Wang Yi visit in the Southern Pacific, how important it is to also to continue to support the economic development of the Pacific Islands, and also to address the concerns with respect to the impact of climate change, but also biodiversity and maritime areas. Another framework which is particularly relevant also for the Indo-Pacific is the Global Gateway. I know that some people will say, well, we hear a lot about global gateway, we don't see much about it. I can tell you it's maybe like a super tanker, a bit slow in starting and steering its course, but it's getting on course and speeding up, gaining speed. And so this will be super important. It's coordinated also with other partners, and not least in the context of the G7. Everything which relates to energy, health is important. And I would say maybe the global impact of the conflict that I mentioned maybe put to the fore these questions of food security, of the economic development even more, or the acceleration, I would say, of the green transition as crucial elements. And last is, of course, is the security pillar of our strategy. So we really need to do more. One element that I would also like to add is the debt. We here in our team we talked about the tsunami after the earthquake, the war being the earthquake, the tsunami being is sort of a far-reaching impact of the conflict, and the debt may be the biggest wave coming, the tsunami wave coming. And what we saw in the Sri Lanka, we may have other Sri Lankas in the making, in the list, and also including in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think the question also of the fiscal space of those countries is key, because no one wants a situation of instability, more situation of instability generated by debt in that part of the world.
Certainly, yeah. I understand what you mean. Well, I would like to move to another dimension. You referred earlier, to the bilateral dialogues that have been set up with the US on the Indo-Pacific. And actually, it is not possible to extract the EU Indo-Pacific strategy from the broader geopolitical context now. It is characterized by the increasing, rivalry between China and the US. And as you know, the VP Borrell referred to the Sinatra doctrine regarding how EU is going its own way in the Indo-Pacific. Well, in the context of a worsening competition between the US and China, and in the context also in the war in Ukraine, where we see, of course, the tremendous importance of the US support, do you think that the EU can keep this approach, can keep its strategic autonomy, so to say, in this region? Or maybe another way to put it is also to highlight how we we do coordinate, to what extent we can coordinate with the US in the region. And on the other side of the coin, how does the Chinese policy of the EU has evolved in the recent months, considering also how China is approaching the war in Ukraine, and how it's backing, in a way, Russia's aggression in Ukraine.
I mean, maybe starting first with the US-China rivalry. I think there is nothing inevitable in that rivalry, in the sense, if I use the words of Ken Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, we really need to manage this strategic competition, because the risk of escalations and going out of control are present. So the EU's position has always been to try to act as a responsible partner in we say, preventing any form of escalation in the region, and maintain this space of let's say of strategic competition. This is a reality. And so we know that the risk of confrontation turning into conflict is sort of growing, and there may be a catastrophic accident that can happen around Taiwan or somewhere else. I think the choke points are many in the region. And we have, I think we are not, when we say strategic autonomy, I think it's important to say, we are not in a position of equidistance between the US and China. I think we have our own approach, our own perspective on China. The US have theirs. We are not the US. That doesn't mean that we do not coordinate and consult and discuss with the US on China, on our respective China policies. And there are a lot of commonalities, that is for sure, in the way we want to address the different form of challenges posed by China. But that doesn't mean we will respond the way US will decide how he wants to respond to that. But one thing is sure, is that our strategy, the strategic outlook of 2019, has been discussed again with member states this year, still considered as valid, even though the space for engagement and cooperation has shrunk. Let's be clear. While the space for, I would say, competition or sometimes confrontation has increased. But we think that we must keep our course in that respect, maintain communication channels open. I can also refer, if one wants to see how we see it, there was just a G7 Prime Minister statement yesterday overnight. I was referring to the systemic difficulties and rivalries with China, but the need to continue to engage with China on a whole series of things. China also spoke, reacted, said that they don't want to see any use of nuclear weapons in the context of the conflict in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. So we have different needs to engage and reasons to engage with China, which I don't think we want to forsake. This said, there is situations, and I heard this morning the first panel, and also later on when it comes to Taiwan, which is a bit of a, I would say, different category, and maybe an issue in itself, and maybe we can come back on that. And when it comes to the way we approach the Indo-Pacific, the US, we engaged with the US before and trying to explain where we're up to with our Indo-Pacific strategy. And when they developed their own Indo-Pacific strategy, they also consulted with us, and we continue to do this. So now they launched this Partners in the Blue Pacific initiative, was presented, I think was yesterday, or is it today now? 22nd. So maybe I'm losing. And presented at, in the margins of the UNGA, and it was initiated by in June by the US. It includes Australia, France, Japan, New Zealand, the UK, the US, and they wanted to check where the EU stands. So the EU will continue its engagement. We have, as I said, a very significant cooperation program there. We see that there are many overlaps or convergence between our strategies. And we want to stick to what we put in our strategy, that it is inclusive, open, and non-confrontational. But it is also rule-based, and we want to defend the international principles. So I think it's very important to what extent this Blue Pacific is a way for the US to add another element of countering and containing China, if it's the design of that strategy or not. The EU will remain, I think, cautious in that respect. So I think there is a lot of discussions ongoing, and the EU, as I understand, will look, let's say, positively, but also with caution to this initiative. But as I said, a lot of alignment of priorities. So I think this is the situation where it is with the US when it comes to the Pacific, let's say the cooperation in the Pacific. A lot of objectives overlap, and we try to work in the same direction.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mr. Delphin. This is quite clear. I would like to go back to the Taiwan issue. We've seen in recent months degradation of the security situation in the Taiwan Strait. We devoted a whole panel this morning to the situation, so there are a lot of concern about possibility of emergency there. And so I have three questions related to this context of growing friction in the Taiwan Strait. The first is what's the EU position vis-à-vis Taiwan as a partner in the Indo-Pacific, because Taiwan is mentioned in the EU Indo-Pacific strategy, and we've heard VP Borrell referring several times to the importance of Taiwan for the economic security also of the Europe in terms of chips and so on. My second question is about what can the EU do, or can the EU do something to prevent any crisis in the cross strait? And the third one is well, in case of a high intensity conflict bursting in the region, is the EU a capable actor? What would the EU do? Is there any vocation for the EU to act in this case, and how would it do that? Thank you. It's not so easy, but thank you.
Yeah, especially the last question is you you will understand that it excuse me, as an official would be a bit. I'm not saying that the EU wants to stay in strategic ambiguity like others, but we cannot. I don't want also to speculate that much. But I mean, first, I think, as you referred to High Representative Borrell, but also the EU, and it's not just there has been statements by the EU Council conclusions that refer to Taiwan, that clearly we want to preserve the status quo and maintain Taiwan for what it is, a vibrant democracy with its freedoms, its economic openness. And indeed, there is also this element that you also alluded to of economic security. We've seen how critical Taiwan is with respect to semiconductors, and we've seen also the way, for example, the US are also brokered deals with TSMC and other companies in the region with respect to semiconductors. So one cannot underrate and underestimate the importance of Taiwan in different respects, I would say, strategically, politically, economically. So what we should avoid, I would say, is to do everything that can prevent an escalation on aggression. And I think this is in the interest of everyone. And not leave anything, let's say, to fortune, instead of spaces that can leave any ambiguity about where we stand. And I think the statements made by the US are pretty clear in that respect. But I think the position of the EU as well, when we say that we are denouncing the escalatory reaction and there is no way for changing the status quo by force. So, and of course, so raising the cost for trying to change the status quo, I think is important in that respect. So maybe that's a way of answering the third part of your questions. I think that is said. So I would say, because so that it doesn't leave any ambiguity, the EU's One China policy framework policy has provided this framework for a long time in our engagement with Taiwan, and we want to remain with that framework. That doesn't mean that we will accept anything coming from the Chinese side with respect to this status quo. Sorry.
Thank you very much. It was not very easy question. I'm really aware of that. So now I would like to share the time, the remaining time with the fellow speaker of the day, and give them the chance to raise a question to you. First, I see Garima. Yeah.
Hi, Garima Mohan from GMF. Nice to see you, Hervé. Question on the Global Gateway. I'm very glad you mentioned it because it is one of the most important instruments the EU has to bring to the Indo-Pacific. We did talk about infrastructure investments in the region, need for alternatives. My question is, where is Global Gateway now? Where does it stand? The projects that we are seeing, I haven't seen much movement, for example, on the EU-India connectivity partnership. What kind of projects are we looking at within Global Gateway? I mean, the idea was to have strategic infrastructure investments, not just development stuff. If you could share a little bit more on that. And second, on the EU-India Trade and Technology Council, if there are any movements or developments on that side, that would be very interesting to know. Generally, I think there are so many things that there are in the EU strategy, but maybe you can share one or two instruments, forums, ways of engagement the EU does in the Indo-Pacific that are working very well, and some that are not and maybe can change or need some improvement. That would be interesting to know from the insider perspective how the implementation of the Indo-Pacific strategy is going. Thank you.
I think you rightly said, Garima, that it's not akin to a development part, even if it serves development objectives as well. It is mostly to develop those infrastructure backbones for the region. So when you say that, you also immediately underline the long-term dimension of those projects. It's not something that you put up, overnight. What we are trying to do is, especially with countries of the region and also at the sub-regional level, is to see how we can support those regional projects, the interconnectors, and it can be physical, it can be virtual, that will help the development of that region. So it can be related to digital, clearly. It can be related to everything which comes from the energy, the green energy. I think these are really two areas of focus for Europe. The third has to do with supply chain, so everything which regarding also the maritime routes and logistics that come with it. So we started Global Gateway at the time we were starting the programming exercise of the monies under the new instrument for cooperation and development. So these are at present how we talk, and I can tell you they are very intense work done, groundwork done to precisely identify these what we see strategic project. Because the worst we could do is sort of thin spreading of the money in a sort of considering that okay, we need to spend fast, but therefore we will do little gimmick project. That is not the name of the game, and understandably so. That may generate frustration. Said, okay, where's the color of the money? How long it would take? But this is what we are talking about: is our structuring projects. And I think this is really the areas where that I mentioned are those which are particularly critical for the future, for the region as well. So this is also our partners who are telling us, this is really what we badly need for the development of our country or our sub-region. So that is really where we want to put the emphasis. The second part of your question, I think I did not copy. You referred to the Trade Council, the US EU Trade Council, or the EU India.
The EU-India Trade and Technology Council, the TTC, that was just created.
Yes, yeah. I wanted to be sure that was indeed India. Yeah. So that is a welcome development. As you know, we are keen to really upgrade our strategic partnership with India. India is also interested in the EU having a greater stake in India's rise in the region. So they want to move up the value chain in both the tech and industrial basis. So I think this council can be a real a catalyst precisely for that, for this cooperation in terms of I would say technological ecosystems, but it can be also a strong vector when it comes to norms and standards. And I think for us it is important also to see where India wants to go in terms of the governance of its digital ecosystem. We've seen also as part of I would say the measures taken that we saw countries of the region. So there was a joint declaration last year in February. EU and 9 countries of the Indo-Pacific on the privacy and the protection of personal data, and India was one of the co-signatories. So this is, I think, also an important signal, because the way we define jointly and we adhere jointly to norms and standards is also a way of marking the quality of the form of economic cooperations we want in the region. And of course, there are other offers. I mean, you read my lips or read my mind about this, but at least this is important that when it comes to norms and standards in the region, or in the context of your question, in the cooperation between EU and India, we also move and converge on that.
Thank you. Wonder if, Fifi, and then maybe Eric, you have some questions also to raise? Okay.
Sure, thank you. My name is Safia Muhibat. I'm with the Center for Strategic and International Studies based in Jakarta, Indonesia. I suppose coming from the Southeast Asian region, one of our concerns is when countries engage Southeast Asia, including in the framework of Indo-Pacific, is always that countries would have China in the back of their mind and in their interest. So not really, their approach to Southeast Asia is not really about Southeast Asia, it's more on the containment of China. So, it's a common feeling that we would, have in Southeast Asia. So, for example, when in 2013, when China started to intensify the Belt and Road Initiative, there were various concerns from external countries, and then, Indo-Pacific, I think, started to gain serious attention when, in 2017, the US would introduce their Indo-Pacific strategy, followed by Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific, and India would have another one, and then Australia would have another one. For us in Southeast Asia, this creates an image that our region is made as a region of competition and not a region of cooperation. So I think this is one of the main reasons why ASEAN then would decide to have their own ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, trying to, well, sort of shift the narrative from being a competition to be a region of more of a cooperation. So I was wondering if you would have any comment of this, because again, the concern for us is that when countries engage Southeast Asia, it's more about containing China and not really about Southeast Asia itself. If I could have a second question, then I think also I mentioned about the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. One of the challenges for us with the AOIP is that it's basically 10 countries with 10 different priorities, 10 different perspectives on Indo-Pacific, 10 countries with different closeness to either the US or China. And I assume this might also be a challenge with the EU Indo-Pacific strategy. Countries would have their own priorities, their own strategies, their own approach towards China. I was wondering if you could comment on this. Thank you so much.
I think it was probably a year ago, or maybe 2 years, I don't remember. I was asked a similar question about China and EU's position, and then at the time I referred that the EU has long made its pivot to Indo-Pacific, and it was an economic one. When you look at the economic stakes or equities we have in the region, they were there on their own right. It was not driven by containing China, and Asia is increasingly becoming the global economic powerhouse. So for the EU not being there for that very reason would be a completely nonsense. It's not driven by containment of China. And even we are not there in that game because we have also this strategy. What we see, though, is also the countries of the region which feel increasingly uncomfortable when other elements than economic cooperation constrain their own choices. And in that respect, the sort of feedback we also have from countries of the region is that they welcome the EU engagement because it provides them options. So I don't think one should not reverse the question or the perspective. It's not about the EU trying to shape the options of the countries, but it's rather the countries of the regions. We see the EU as a way of opening up their choices and their options. But we are there. We were there before, and we will continue to be there because I think economically this is where we've been invested. We are, in terms of FDI, in terms of FDA, of trade, in terms of ODA, we are either one or second or third. So this is what has been the driver of EU engagement in the region and remains the main driver. But what we see is that this region is at the risk that what the glue that kept it together, which was the economic cooperation, is increasingly endangered by this rise of this escalation of tensions. And our role as EU is not to fuel that escalation of tensions, but at the same time to recall all parties that in the regions is that, in order not to have this, is stick to level playing field in the economy, refrain from coercive economic measures, abide by international law and principles. This is what we are after. And I don't think it can be mistaken for a containment policy of China. The way, the second part of your question, or your second question, the way each country of the region defines its own relationship with China, of course, I mean, this is a factor we take into account, but not to the extent that we will force the country to adjust. I mean, we have our own terms. Said, you want to do business with us, So this is, you want to have access to the European single market. These are our principles. This is the way we do business. If you want it, do it. We are not forcing you. But if I look at the numbers of trade agreements and cooperation agreements that the countries of the region want to have with the EU, for me, it's like, they walk their talk. They vote with their feet in a way, or with their signing. So that is the way, I would say, to adjust our offer to what the countries of the regions are interested in. The same way some are very interested in cooperating in the security and defense area. And this part of our cooperation has expanded, and it's security in the wider sense. But I suppose it's for reasons that they are interested in that. So we are also willing and forthcoming in developing our cooperation, not because we are driven by a logic of containment of a party, but simply of maintaining, I would say, a level of stability in the region that is conducive and the interest of everyone.
Thanks a lot. Eric, would you like to jump in?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Erik Balbach. I'm with the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, SWP, in Berlin. I'm working mainly on North and South Korea, so basically a twofold question. South Korea will publish its new Indo-Pacific strategy most likely in October in the context of the East Asia Summit. Just returned from Seoul and talked to the new Indo-Pacific division, which is fittingly part of the North America division within South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which basically points to the question I want to ask you, namely that how can the EU make sure, and you partly answered that question previously now, how can the EU make sure that we don't lose, let's say, the attractiveness of our own narrative, of our own strategy, especially when we talk about the return of, let's say, hard security politics on the Korean Peninsula? Second question with regard to North Korea, as opposed to Taiwan, I think that North Korea was not mentioned in the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy, and of course not all conflicts, not all challenges in the region can be directly addressed in a strategy paper like this. But I think that in the North Korean case, previously we had a discourse on the Asia-Pacific, we had a discourse on Northeast Asia, on East Asia. It was unthinkable to talk about these regions without mentioning North Korea. I feel that since the discourse has shifted towards an Indo-Pacific discourse, North Korea is hardly a part of any of the discourse anymore, even though I feel there is a country that has the potential to basically derail most of our implementation efforts on the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy if they, let's put it bluntly, decide to play ball. It's going to be very difficult. How do we deal with a country like North Korea in the future, especially as Europeans, as we have still, let's say, a special relation to North Korea? Is there any debate within the EU, within the EEAS, to restart political dialogue with North Korea, or is that off the table for now? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I should start by the end. In order to have dialogue, you need two to tango, and I don't have the impression that there is an interest for dialogue. And even our South Korean colleagues, when we discussed, they said, our door for dialogue is open, but if through the door we see ballistic missiles flying, is it so conducive to dialogue? I mean, you know very well, and certainly more than me, the situation there in North Korea, with say even the way they articulate their nuclear posture, which is probably not a change, but the way they say it now is a clear indication of where they want to go. And after the period where there were a bit of an opening, and which the EU could have accompanied the process, we were not certainly in the front seat, but we were discussing with our partners in the regions. We were probably also accompanying and supportive. Now we are not in that context anymore. I think we should rather, it's not just about the Indo-Pacific. What we see happening in North Korea should be seen also in the light of what we are seeing now with the behavior of Russia, is what Iran might do or not do in the context of the JCPOA. What I mean by that is the risk of, with respect to the nuclear non-proliferation is significant. Maybe it has escaped a bit the attention, but there were statements made earlier this year with respect to non-proliferation, which shows the gravity of the situation in which we are. And I think this is through that perspective that indeed the question of North Korea should be addressed. We know that all sanctions taken against North Korea, there were physical loopholes, and those who have been supporting the loopholes are probably also countries, one country at least, which has also a part of a problem that we face now in our part of the continent. So you're right in saying that we should not lose sight of that, and I don't think we do. The fact that it looks maybe below the radar doesn't mean that it is underestimated. I think it's in the first order of risk that security risk that we face at present. And I can tell you this is certainly feature high in our bilateral dialogues with countries and partners of the region.
Okay, now we have a little bit more than 5 minutes left, so I think that Mark has a question, and then I will encourage other people in the room also start thinking about their own.
Thank you, Mark Julien from Ifri. You said earlier that the EU would do everything to prevent a conflict or a crisis in the Taiwan Strait. I would like to push you a little further and to provide us with more details on what the EU is concretely doing in preventing this kind of conflict or escalation in this area. Thank you.
I think there is a lot of political signaling through the statements made, and I don't think they leave any room for ambivalence, or they are not equivocal when we speak about or the EU makes statement about Taiwan. This is also an element which is conveyed in the context of the bilateral EU-China relations. I guess you're talking to the policy planners. I guess that, like many others, we are looking into the scenarios, and that is to inform our options and how we can handle the different possibilities. What I said earlier at the very beginning is the way the EU responded to the Russians' aggression in Ukraine indicates is that the EU is not necessarily what people thought it was. That is just an economic entity, but with little, let's say, security and defense muscle. I think we are proving it. Those who believe that way wrong. If you look at the way we are using the EPF in a peace facility, the way we mobilize resources, and don't forget that we have the implementation of the strategic compass underway, which also includes one of the fourth pillar is the partnerships. So there are different ways for us to approach that reality. But the first point is clearly maintain the space for diplomacy and make it absolutely clear where we stand. And I think this is the most important, to precisely avoid any possible miscalculation. And I think that is what is important at this point in time.
Okay, so last question.
My name is Richard Carey, and I'm a participant in a group called the China West Dialogue, which consists of people from think tanks, including think tanks in China, think tanks in Paris as well. Francois participates. And my question relates to politics in China and politics in Beijing at the present time. This has been referred to briefly at certain points today, but there is reporting out of Japan recently that while Xi Jinping will get another term, the new prime minister may be somebody who brings back policies of Deng Xiaoping. So that could change quite a lot in Chinese policy. So my question to Hervé is what might be the European Union reaction in such a context? And an additional question is, what is likely to be the fate of the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment? Thank you.
I think all the sinologists will be reading carefully the long statement coming out of the 20th Party Congress in mid-October. We had discussions also with specialists internally, how much we should speculate on who is going to be in the Politburo, who will get what will the prime ministers. I think it's important that to see how China will address its both its domestic challenges, and there are many. I don't think there should be no Schadenfreude about the kind of challenges China faces domestically that could, how could I put it, create instability, and because of the instability, create further reactions with externalities. I think we see Xi Jinping very much driven by the domestic situation, and whether it is questions of environment, I mean, air polluted, water polluted, soil polluted. You see that it is a concern. The zero COVID policy, what is the social acceptance or now sort of social resistance? How is going to manage the demographics, and also not just in quantitatively, but also qualitatively between the rural area and the coastal area? How are you going to manage the sort of homegrown growth of and manage the decoupled, the double circuit economy, dual circulation economy? The estate risk of a bubble burst, which construction has represent 25% of Chinese GDP, and we've seen what has with Evergrande situation. The risks are significant. So I think we will have to see how China handles that. And for Europeans, what would be the measure is what happens in terms of maintaining the conditions of business for our enterprises. What is the level of level playing field or asymmetry which is built into it? And I think these are the questions that are key also in answer to your question about the CAI. I think there were some developments in China, including with respect to the situation in the Xinjiang. that also provide the background to the decision on the EU side. And certainly on the side of our parliament, but also of many member states, there is no much appetite to move on this if there is no movement on the Chinese side. So I think here, I wouldn't say we're stuck. We just want to see what the Chinese side, how it will move. And I think we will judge on facts, not on speculation of who gets which post. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our time is up now, so I would like to thank you first, Mr. Delphin, for accepting this grilling session. I hope it was not too too difficult, but thanks a lot. It was very useful to get your insight about what the EU is doing in the region. And at the end of the day, I wouldn't dare trying to wrap up by providing a summary of all that was said. We started with the impact of the war in Ukraine, in Asia, and we dealt with Taiwan and North Korea hotspots, and then we came back all the way to the EU to see how EU is doing in the region. I think the discussion were fascinating. I hope that we can reconvene next year, also in person, maybe with more speakers present in the room to continue our exchanges. And I would like to thank all the participants of today for the very good presentations. I would like to thank the Ifri technical team here and the All Center for Asian Studies, and especially John Simon, who managed to to organize this whole event in a hybrid format, which is not really simple. So thanks a lot, and have a good evening, have a good afternoon.